God led his people out of Egypt and through the desert. He wanted them in the desert. He could have taken them along the coastal route, but he chose instead to lead them through the desert in order to test them. The desert is a place of testing because in the desert you cannot make it unless you rely completely on God. God didn't just want to see what his people believed and knew in their hearts. He wanted to see that belief put into action in their lives. He appeared as a pillar of smoke by day and a pillar of fire by night. And after traveling for 2 days, God led the Israelites to a well. However, the water was bitter and they couldn't drink it. And the Israelites became angry and began to whine and grumble against Moses. So God told Moses to put a stick in the well, and the water became sweet. The place was named Marah, which means bitter, because the water was bitter, and because the Israelites had a bitter spirit. The Hebrew root of the word Marah also refers to deliberate, defiant disobedience. The Israelites failed their first test. They showed God what was in their hearts, and their hearts were bitter. But God still chose to provide for their needs anyway, and he showed them that they needed to rely on him to heal them of their bitterness, just as he turned the bitter water sweet. God then led them away from Marah, and they came to a place called Elim, where there were 12 wells and 70 palms. Later, the Israelites began to whine and grumble against Moses again. They wanted the food that they had back in Egypt, and so God provided food for them. He sent bread from heaven for them each morning, and every evening he sent flocks of quail through the camp. When the Israelites first saw the bread from heaven lying on the ground, they said, "What is it?" They named the bread manna, which means, "What is it?" The text says that the manna looked like thin flakes of frost, so you could say that God gave them frosted flakes every morning. But God never gave them more than what they needed for the day, their daily bread. And when some of the Israelites tried to hoard the manna, it became infected with maggots. You see, they were trying to rely on their own cleverness rather than on God's daily provision. God then led the Israelites to another desert, where there was again no water, and the people once again began to whine and grumble against Moses. Moses asked, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you put the Lord to the test?" And Moses complained about them to God, claiming they were about to stone him. So God told him to go hit a rock with his staff, and when Moses did so, water began gushing forth from the rock, and everyone had enough to drink. Moses called the place Massah and Meribah, which means testing and quarreling. Later, the Amalekites attacked the Israelites. They were the first people to declare war on Israel. While Joshua led the Israelites in battle, Moses, Aaron, and Hur went to the top of a hill and watched. Every time Moses lifted his arms towards heaven, the Israelites were winning, and every time he let his hands drop, they were losing. And Moses lifted his arms towards heaven all day long, and when he became too exhausted, Aaron and Hur held his arms up for him. Joshua defeated the Amalekites, but he didn't do it alone. He had Moses' help. And Moses didn't work alone either. He had the help of Aaron and Hur, and none of them would have succeeded if it weren't for the help of God. So the Israelites went on their way towards Mount Sinai in the land of Midian, and Moses' family came from Midian to visit Moses out in the desert. Moses told his father-in-law Jethro about everything that had happened in Egypt, and Jethro praised God and offered sacrifices. The next day, Moses sat in the judge's seat, and all the people lined up to present their various cases and disputes to him. And by the end of the day, Moses was worn out. So Jethro showed Moses how to set up a proper system of courts and judges, saying, "What you're doing isn't good. You and these people who come to you will only wear yourselves out. The work is too heavy for you. You cannot handle it alone." Eventually, after 3 months of desert wandering, the Israelites finally came to the desert of Sinai and camped at the foot of the mountain. Mount Sinai is also known as Mount Horeb. We don't know the exact location of Mount Sinai, but it is where God had first revealed himself to Moses. And it is at Sinai that God meets with his people and he makes a covenant with them. The Sinai covenant added further to the Abrahamic covenant. If Israel would be faithful to him, God promised to make them into a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. And he appeared on the mountain in a great cloud of smoke with lightning. And the people were afraid and wanted Moses to be their intermediary. Moses told the people what God said, and the people agreed that they would be faithful to the covenant. And God began to lay down his law, starting with the 10 basic commands. 1. You shall have no other gods before me. Or in other words, even if you should come across other gods, don't have anything to do with them. I'm number 1. 2. You shall not make for yourself an idol. Or in other words, don't exchange the Creator for the created. 3. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God. Or in other words, don't give God a bad name by either your words or your actions. 4. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 5. Honor your father and your mother. 6. You shall not murder. 7. You shall not commit adultery. 8. You shall not steal. 9. You shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. And 10. You shall not covet. Or in other words, don't long to live someone else's life, to have their clothes, their marriage, their property. Now according to the text, the Israelites only made it so far before telling Moses to make God stop talking to them because they were scared to death of the voice of God. And so Moses became the man in the middle, delivering God's God's mail to his people, a prophet. And as we'll soon find out, Moses had a lot of mail to deliver.